Sermon of the Week 12. Take me to the best club in town, he said, a faint smile on his clean-cut face. He had just recently begun to shave, and as it was his birthday tomorrow, he wanted to go out on the town and have some experiences. He knew all his friends would want to take him out on the town tomorrow, but it would just end up in a group party. Tonight he wanted to see what he might find out on his own. How about the Dozen Club, the cab driver said, narrowly avoiding a pedestrian couple. Dozen? What's that? No, I want something more upscale, something hot, he said, a wider smile coming to his lips. Sir, this is the most exclusive club in all the city. Really? How do you know? No, I want something like the Three of Diamonds or Eden's Gate. He had heard of those, but he had never been there. Okay, but the Dozen is the most exclusive, impossible to get in, but I have a pass. How much? 100. I might not have that. No problem, I have a free one. I'll give it to you for 20. Done. How far is it? He said. Oh, about 10 minutes, the driver said. Let's do it. The cab was soon at the door of the club. It was a solid brass door, but no doorman was present. Interestingly, there was no sign on the building. You sure this is it? The cabbie nodded, and he exited. He walked up to the door and opened it slowly. It was very heavy. He stepped inside and saw a gorgeous red-haired hostess dressed in very little. Welcome, sir. May I have your pass? He fumbled in his coat pocket, found the crinkled paper, and handed it to her. She put her arm around him and escorted him through another brass door. She pointed to a chair with a small round table. He sat. She kissed his cheek and said, Enjoy. He surveyed the room. There was a jazz combo playing soft music and a dancer on a narrow stage dancing with a very revealing purple costume on. He thought he recognized one of his friends in a far corner, but upon closer look realized it was no one he knew. He looked in another corner and this time did recognize someone. It was the mayor of the city smoking a cigar, grinning from ear to ear with a blonde on each knee. He then and there decided maybe the cabbie was right. Maybe this was the most exclusive club in the city. He leaned back, hoping someone would bring him a drink, and as he was suddenly very thirsty, he pulled a cigar out of his pocket. Hi, stranger, said three voices simultaneously. He looked up to see a redhead, a blonde, and a brunette staring him in the face. How are you? The three voices said again in glorious unison. Better now. The last part of the Old Testament is a fascinating read. I'm not sure why God edited it in such a way, but once you get through the deep and complicated prophecies of Daniel, you run into a dozen short books, each named for a prophet. Only a highlight or two of the prophet's life is recorded. However, each and every one of the 12 short books had some scalding criticism of the Hebrew nation. And of course, these are not unfounded accusations. In fact, Israel and Judah both eventually come to the conclusions that the criticisms are very fair, if not harsh enough. Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. These are the 12 men God decides to use to prophesy to Israel. No doubt there were many more prophets and the leaders that God used to try and save his now divided nation from clutches of the kings of the world, but alas, it was not enough. Certainly God could have saved them. He had the power to do so and still does today. I've often wondered if God gets tired. Oh, not physically tired, that would be an impossibility, but mentally tired. Genesis 2:2 says, God rested. Surely not from physical exhaustion, but from mental fatigue. He wanted to survey what he had just done, so he took a day off. Probably the last day he took off until 2020, and likely the last day he will take off until he makes the new earth. No, I think God gets tired of all the actions of his people, humanity. The Bible is filled with episode after episode of humans making and acting on poor decisions. From Cain to Abraham to Moses to Saul to Solomon to etc., God finally was tired of his Hebrew nation. He finally realized that for them to continue self-rule would end in self-destruction. He finally gave up and realized only another captivity period would possibly bring them to their senses. But before he gives up completely, he sends one last series of men or prophets to try and sway the minds of the divided Hebrew nation. God likes the number 12, and so he sent 12 prophets in a last-ditch attempt to win back his people. You will remember that these Hebrews were the only people after the flood to even acknowledge that God was the true God. Today, some 50% of the world believes in the true God. 2 billion Christians and 1.5 billion of Islam, along with 14 million Jews. Israel's population today is 9 million, with 75% being Jews. They all believe in the true God. At the time of Hosea in 750 BC, the world population was some 100 million. At that time, there were about 5 million Jews, or 5% of the population. The Jewish race has survived, but just barely. Let's get back to our hero. You will remember he was staring at three of the most beautiful girls in the world. His mind began to race as never before. Which one would he choose to buy a drink? He always liked blondes, but also thought them to be a little high and mighty, much like the Greek tribes of this day. The brunette was luscious, but most of his friends and schoolmates were dark-haired. No, he decided this night he wanted something different. He took the hand of the tall, stunning redhead, and she slid onto his lap. Their eyes met, and the electricity was instantaneous. "My name is Hosea." "Mine is Gomer," she said, brushing her lips lightly against his ear. "Would you like to buy me a drink?" she asked, waving a cocktail waitress toward their table. Yes," he stammered. "Bring me a rum and coke and one for Hosea here, too," she said. "Are you from the city?" she asked. "Yes, I graduate from high school tomorrow," he said. "Well, we better figure out a graduation present for you," she said, kissing his cheek. "Oh, I already have. Honey, whatever you have will not compare to what I will give you." He reached for his drink, but his hand was shaking and he spilled it on her long red velvet dress. "Oh, I'm sorry," he said. "No worries," she said. She now kissed him on the lips and said, "I'll be back in a minute. I get off at 2. Will you stay and then we can go out and celebrate?" He nodded, and she walked away as only a redhead can do. He was smitten, and he knew it. He and his friends had often talked of what it was like to fall in love and how long it was supposed to take. But now he knew it took only an instant he wanted to last a lifetime. And the Lord said to Hosea, "Go take unto thee a wife of whoredoms and children of whoredoms, for the land hath committed great whoredom, departing from the Lord." So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, which conceived and bare him a son. Hosea 1, 2, and 3. The Bible says that God tells Hosea to take a prostitute for a wife and to have children with her. And to our surprise, he does exactly that. Hosea's name means salvation, and Gomer's name means completion. By this scenario, we again realize we can't always understand God. Why would he tell Hosea to take Gomer as his wife when he knew that she would likely be unfaithful to him in the future? In fact, this is exactly what happens also, and in most instances the marriage would soon come apart at the seams. But as only God knew, this did not happen either. Yes, Gomer was unfaithful to Hosea, and if you read closely, she left him to live with another lover. In fact, this was a repeated activity. But eventually her lovers all abandoned her, and she returned to Hosea, not so much because she wanted to, but, and I quote, "For then was it better with me than now," Hosea 2:7. She realized that Hosea still loved her and decided to go back and try to patch things up. In chapter 3, verse 3, this actually happens. "And I said unto her, Thou shalt abide for me many days. Thou shalt not play the harlot, and thou shalt not be for another man. So will I also be for thee." God uses us all, and in this case he made Hosea and Gomer examples of what the Hebrew nation had become and would become. Humanity is very hard-headed, but this story they understand. Hosea and the rest of his book goes on a tirade railing against the sins of Israel. He was born of the 10 tribes, or northern kingdom of Israel, and prophesies to them. He pulls no punches. He tells it like it is. Hear the word of the Lord, ye children of Israel, for the Lord hath controversy with the inhabitants of the land, because there is no truth, nor mercy, nor knowledge of God in the land. By swearing and lying and killing and stealing and committing adultery, they break out, and blood toucheth blood. Hosea 4, 1 and 2. Sounds like a full breaking of the 10 Commandments in a nutshell. And as troops of robbers wait for a man, so the company of priests murder in the way by consent, for they commit lewdness. Hosea 6:9. Sound familiar? It fit evil then, and it fits evil now, and God tells them not only what they're doing, but what his judgment will be. He shall not return in the land of Egypt, and the Assyrian will be his king. Hosea 11:5. In fact, Hosea uses the word Assyria 8 times in his 12 short chapters. Israel not only knows what it is doing, but what will be the end result. However, as history forever repeats, man chooses to keep on doing what he is doing, no matter the consequences. It's not because he can't change, it is because he won't. God gave man one unique ability, the ability to make a choice. It would seem so simple to make the right ones, but man is woefully short of 50%. He flunks every test. Why, you ask? Because he thinks he's smarter than his God, his Creator. From Lucifer onward, it has been and continues to be. But God knows it won't go on forever. He knows man must see that only by choosing good over evil, peace over chaos, will he be able to survive. Hosea eventually points this out. They that dwell under his shadow shall return. They shall revive as the corn and grow as the vine. The scent thereof shall be as the wine of Lebanon. Hosea 14:7. And in fact, Israel, which was captured in 722 BC, did return and become a nation again in 457 BC. I will digress briefly now. And Jacob fled into the country of Syria, and Israel served for a wife, and for a wife he kept sheep. Hosea 12:12. Jacob, like so many other humans, was used by God as an example of what wrong choices cause, what subsequent right choices cause, and how God will be with us through it all. The beauty of God's weaving interactions and interconnections with his humanity is marvelous. When we study it, we are staggered by its infinite complexity, tenderness, and patience. I believe it is just a glimpse into God's wonderful plan of salvation. Take time to study Hosea and the other 11 minor prophets. They all have a major story to tell. "Hey, cabbie," he yelled at the top of his lungs. To his surprise, the yellow checker pulled to the curb 100 feet ahead of him. He ran to it, opened the door, and climbed in. The folding seat was up, so he pushed it down to the floor as the cab sped away. "Where to?" the cabbie said. Hosea noticed the driver wore a turban. "Dozen Club," Hosea said. "Ah, good choice. Still the most exclusive club in town. Are you a member?" the cabbie asked. "No, just like the place. I've never been, but I hear it's very plush, and the women..." "Yeah, I met my wife there," Hosea said. "Really? Does she still?" "No, that's been over a long time. I sometimes just crave the company of women." "Understandable. I am married 30 years and still am in love." The cabbie turned toward him and smiled. "You're one of the lucky ones. Most marriages don't." Suddenly they both heard the blare of a horn. The driver turned back and just missed a red Cadillac. That driver honked his horn several more times, but the cabbie, who was used to such, said nothing and just kept on driving. "Have you heard the latest news?" the cabbie said. "No, haven't had the telly on for a few days. Been on the road. The new General Sargon II has taken the suburb of East Samaria. The fighting is fierce, but the newspaper says the city may fall in another month." "I expect it's inevitable," Hosea shrugged. "Then they will certainly go on and take Jerusalem. What will we do?" "Have to trust our Maker," Hosea said almost absent-mindedly. Even God can't stop Sargon. We're all doomed, the cabbie almost shrieked. The cab pulled up to the Dozen Club. A tall man opened the Checkers door, and Hosea stepped out into the cool evening air. Hosea handed the driver a 20 and said, "Keep the change and trust in God." The cabbie slammed down the accelerator, spraying Hosea with some wet mud. He ignored it and was escorted into the club. He was greeted by a tall, red-headed girl. "Hi, Dad," she said, taking his coat and brushing the mud from his trousers. "Hi, Lo," he said. "Any open tables?" "Sure, I've saved one special just for you," his daughter said. "Come with me." She took him to the corner table and waved the waitress over. "Take care of my dad. He's special," she said. The waitress nodded. "Rum and coke, sir?" He nodded and watched her sway away. Presently a waitress returned. A petite brunette was already seated on his lap. The two were engaged in the usual conversation heard in any club. "That will be $5, sir," a pleasant voice said. Hosea noticed a slight tinge of familiarity. He reached for his billfold, then looked up and immediately dropped his billfold on the brunette's lap. He stared for a long moment at the red-headed waitress. She stared back at him. Without taking her eyes from hers, he said, "Could you excuse us, honey?" he said to the petite brunette. "Sure, I'll be right back." She put his billfold down her bra and walked away. "Gomer, is it you?" She did not smile, but kept staring at him. "It's me, Hosea. $5. He searched for his billfold, then realized the brunette had it. He pointed her way. Gomer nodded and began to turn away. "Could we talk?" Hosea said. "I get off at 2, she said. "I'll be waiting," he said.